Chapter 4. Havoc or Help. Yellow clouds seemed to pour from Sun's shoes as he skated us up into the sky, dragging me through the air by the wayside. I watched the ground as we ascended through the clouds, slowly getting farther away as the buildings became indistinguishable from the landscape. It was only a few moments before I spotted something odd. Above the forest seemed to be a swirling mass of black clouds like a hurricane, but I was surprised when I noticed that it was actually getting bigger, growing even as everything around it looked smaller from the distance we were ascending. I was about to point it out to Sun, but we passed through the field of clouds before landing atop them. My head swiveled in awe as I took in the landscape of the heavens. In front of us was a massive, decadent, ornate palace with an entrance hall that stretched for ages, but every direction held unparalleled beauty. To the left I could see a grove of peach trees behind a gate. To the right was a stable filled to the brim with heavenly horses of varying colors, breeds, and sizes, and behind us was a large, closed gateway. I looked to Sun and he pointed forward into the entrance hall. "The Jade Emperor's the old fart on a big throne. You'll see him at the end of the hall with his advisors. I would go in with you, but I don't want to hurt your chances of actually getting some help," he said, before casually resting his arms behind his head. I said, "All right then, I'll be back soon," and headed inside. The massive entrance hall had marble floors with intricate patterns on them and huge stone pillars running along both sides of the main path. In front of each pillar stood what I assumed to be men wearing all sorts of different military uniforms. I say I assume because while some had quite normal faces, others had faces that resembled demons or animals, and each carried with them a polearm-type weapon. After walking for what felt like ages, I finally saw a few specks on the horizon in the center of the path. It took me a good few minutes to get to them, but as I approached I started hearing a commotion. In the center of the path was the one I assumed to be the Jade Emperor. He was huge and had focused blue eyes, a thin mustache, and a black beard so narrow it could be confused for a needle. He wore eloquent white robes embroidered with green and gold patterns, and he was sitting on a golden throne as a large man with a bright red face and beastly fangs spoke to him urgently. The man was wearing a blue uniform and rubbed his hands together anxiously as he spoke, but I didn't get to hear what he was saying because without warning, a tiny man flew in on a yellow cloud from somewhere off to the left. He had a huge white beard and his eyebrows were so shaggy I couldn't see his eyes, along with a simple gray robe and a pointed blue hat. He flew in, landed beside the Jade Emperor in a panic, and quickly started telling him of the news. "My lord! My lord! We have an emergency!" he cried. The red man stopped speaking and the Jade Emperor looked to the old man. "The Ming Song family! They've really done it this time! They've ventured into Diu, hell, and awoke Light Eater Towdy! What are we going to do? If we don't act now, the entire world will be plunged into darkness!" The Jade Emperor didn't respond. Instead, he looked to the old man with grave seriousness and deep grimness in the lines of his face. "Light Eater what now?" I asked when I heard silence on the air. "Towdy, one of the 4 great omens. If all 4 are awoken, an untold apocalypse will darken the sun," he explained. "Darken the sun," I repeated back, starting to understand the severity of the situation. Before it could fully sink in, the large red man the Jade Emperor had been speaking with prior stepped up to me with hands on his hips and a sneering look of disgust. "Just who are you anyway? Who sent you?" he started to say. But we were all taken aback when the Jade Emperor himself reached out and grabbed him by the shoulder. The moment his gentle hand touched him, the man looked back with great surprise before getting out of his way and kneeling before him without a word. "Young one, return Towdy to his prison in Diu, and the Chinese pantheon will lend you our aid," he said. His voice was calm and somber, yet hopeful and pure, and his words rang true in my spirit. I could feel his good intentions radiating off of him so strongly I didn't bother to question his reading of my thoughts. I knew he'd done it for a good reason. I nodded to him and smiled softly. I waited a moment to see if he would speak once more, but when he didn't, I turned and marched out of Heaven's entrance hall. When I returned to the cloudy courtyard, I was dumbstruck to find Sun had left me behind. I poked around for him, but I couldn't find him anywhere. Annoyed, I said to myself, "Just great. And I don't know how to get down from—" "Ah!" I screamed as I started to fall through the clouds. I spun head over heels as I plummeted down through the sky, trying to think of a way to right myself. Then I remembered Jacob had used strategic bursts of fire to maneuver through the air during the Tournament of Champions. I could only control fire a little bit because I hadn't practiced with it in so long, but I managed to make a burst of flame in my hands and stop spinning. Then I really saw it. The dark clouds that had risen over the forest had grown more numerous and stayed just as heavy throughout. They were already covering Dongfu village and other places in the surrounding area. It was only a moment or two before I passed through them and fell to the ground. The landing was rough on my knees and sent a ringing sensation from my feet all the way through my body. I stood up straight and took in my surroundings, having landed on the forested road I came into town on. It was dark here. So dark it was like the sun had already been darkened, and all that remained was eternal night. My eyes took a minute or two to adjust, but my senses were elevated by the change in environment. After I gathered myself, I headed into the village to see what was going on. The people had gathered in the town square, having set up torches, candles, and lanterns to provide them some relief from the overwhelming shadows. The darkness in this place was so crushing that the light simply couldn't travel very far, meaning the bleeding light we're used to seemed like it could never exist here. Why, it existed in small pockets of seeable distance, looking as though they were mere fireflies to anyone close enough to see them. As I approached the square, the very small amount of noise I had been hearing stopped suddenly, all except a child crying. Even that sound was nearly muffled in the overwhelming dark. The monkeys were gone. When I asked the citizens what happened, they told me the monkeys were spooked by the encroaching dark and fled back to their forest. I also asked if anyone had seen the Ming Song family skip town, and in what direction they went, but all I found out was that their horses were no longer stabled nearby. I had them lead me to their wounded, and there I found Zhao completely unconscious. He had wrappings over his eye and his knee, but it seemed he would recover all right. Apparently the bolt had missed his kneecap by a few centimeters, so the only surgery he'd needed was for his eye. There were only a handful of others wounded, but there were still several there complaining of stomach aches and numbness. Then I returned to Ju's house and explained what happened. She immediately headed out to check on her brother. With a sigh, I joined her, and we waited patiently together. We waited nearly 2 hours for him to wake up, but eventually the doctor told us that he could be out for days from the shock. I was tired and hungry, but as I looked around the sick ward, I found many people of the area gathered and helping the wounded. There was a familiar little girl crying about her lost puppy, but no one dared to go look for it. Eventually I had my fill of trying to sleep and headed out into the forest. The oppressive dark was still bearing down, but my eyes adjusted quickly enough. I returned to the site of my first engagement with the Ming Song family, but it was impossible to follow the tracks their cart left without any light. I gathered up some dry tinder and wrapped it around a sturdy, recently dead log I found on the ground before setting it ablaze with elementalism. It made a fairly useful torch once the tinder burned away, and I used it to follow the tracks the cart left behind. Deep into the forest they led me to a fairly large cave in the base of a cliffside. As soon as I entered, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The cave narrowed inside for a while before it opened up and led me to a great underground city. Unfortunately, just as I entered, I walked right into a nearly invisible barrier. I took a step back and pushed against it with my hands, surprised I was unable to go any further. A barrier, huh? Those Ming Songs must have found a way to pass through it, I said to myself. Actually, no one alive can go through, a familiar voice said from behind me. I turned back to find that monkey girl Ren standing there with a hand on her hip. But then, how did they, I asked myself as I returned to examining the near-invisible barrier. No clue, she said with a shrug. So then, what are you doing here? I asked. I could ask you the same thing, she said, crossing her arms. Oh, so that's it. You were following me. Ren nodded and gave a cheeky, uh-huh, in affirmation. I couldn't help but smile as I turned back to her. Jacob and I snuck out a lot too, so I wasn't going to bother asking her about that. But something about her reminded me of myself. So you're a demigod too, right? Do you know anything about those Ming Songs or what they came here for? I asked. She shook her head before she asked, That's what I was hoping to ask you about, with disappointment in her eyes as she kicked up some dirt in the other direction. I hear your dad's pretty strong. Why not leave it to him? I asked. Ren pursed her lips and puffed out her cheeks as she looked away. I waited a moment to see if she would answer, but when she didn't, I held up my fist and said, Listen, if you're strong enough to be of use, then I could use some help dealing with this touty thing, but if you don't have the nerve to back it up, then you should probably listen to your father. She seemed dumbfounded, and even more so when I started heading straight past her out of the cave. She called, Hey, wait! And started running after me, but I didn't wait up. She caught up to me after a few moments and asked, You really want to fight a creature like Touty? I don't really have any choice, I explained. But there's no way you can win. Besides, it's supposed to be imprisoned here in Diu, Ren said. It's been set free by the Ming Song family. I'm not sure if they meant to from what they were talking about before, but I don't really care. The creature they unleashed is a far more pressing matter. You sound pretty confident. What makes you think you can handle it? She asked. Nothing. That's what makes it so exciting, I replied with a smile. Huh, no wonder my dad likes you. Anyway, what do you plan to do now? Ren asked. Do you know where the Ming Song family lives? I imagine they're going to report back home to their father after what they said earlier, I conjectured. Ren shook her head. No, my dad might, but I'm not sure if asking him is the best idea, she said with shyness I hadn't expected. So I asked, why not? And she replied, because he'll just tell me to go back home again. She pouted and furrowed her brow as she crossed her arms in frustration. Yeah, but what if I ask? I queried. I imagine the same thing, only he might actually help you, or he might tell you to bug off. I sighed and said, real helpful, as we exited the mouth of the cave. I stopped for a moment and looked around. Ren, do all the spirits of this region use DU as their path to the afterlife? Ren put a hand to her chin as she thought about it a moment. I think so. Why? She asked in reply. Because we haven't even seen one spirit. Surely someone or something has died in the last 5 minutes or so that we've been here. So why haven't we seen any? I asked. She seemed absolutely baffled by my question before looking deeply into the cave and then at our surroundings. I don't know. I didn't even notice that. What does that mean? She asked, seeming confused. I'm not sure, but I really don't like it. Come on, I've got to go get someone, I said. Ren nodded, and then she and I walked through the darkened forest towards Dongfu in silence for about 5 minutes before I thought of something. I realized the only way to get my answer was to ask her, so I asked, by the way, how did you find me? Can you sense energy like some divines back home? Yes, sort of. I followed your chi. It's kind of like life energy, but not quite the same thing, she said, seeming a bit nervous about her answer. What's different about it? I asked in reply. I don't know. My dad told me a little about it, but not much. All I know is they're different somehow, she said. She was about to say something else when I covered her mouth because I heard a massive footstep crunch through a log nearby. She looked like she heard it too and didn't make another sound. I heard another great crunching step a little closer this time, but Ren and I both had our heads turning about in panic, trying to find its source. Then I heard a tiny frightened yelp as a little black puppy ran through some bushes, its feet flailing wildly to propel it forward. Ren reached down and snatched the little guy up and started trying to gently calm him, but he yelped harder as another stomping crunch approached. From the darkness, a pair of bright yellow eyes emerged. It stood nearly 2 stories tall, and its black body was like seeing liquid ink against the darkness. But I could still see it was shaped like a massive, bulky horse with a pair of curled horns on its head and a red mane that glowed faintly like the foggy light of a soul. It had a stone mask that covered most of its eyes on the top part of its head, but you could still faintly see the burning yellow pupils smoldering underneath. Ren started backing away with wide eyes as her breath grew unsteady, and that puppy was struggling, barking, and practically shrieking with terror. I drew my blade and held my ground. So, you must be Towdy, I said, unsure if it would speak to me. I was surprised when the horse-like mouth seemed to curl up into a smile and it nodded at me, as if it was answering my question. What are you doing? We have to get out of here, Ren cried with fright. You go. I'll be fine, I said, hoping I would be right. Before Ren could respond, Towdy crouched down low and gave a whinnying roar. Its eyes flashed bright pink, and with it came unyielding, literally blinding darkness. I couldn't see a hand in front of my face, but my hearing grew muffled as the puppy's cries grew distant and indistinct. The darkness was so overwhelming I couldn't even feel the movement of the air. I felt like it was strangling me and grabbed at my throat, but there was nothing there to remove from my windpipe. In an instant, suddenly I was assaulted by my worst memories. My dad kicking the crap out of Jacob and I multiple times. My dad killing my cat when I was 7. The hole. Anemone accidentally pushing me off the pier when I was 12. Jacob's father's death when I was 14. And a whole slew of accidents from Enyo's training. I counted myself lucky the memories faded before I reached the incident with Junia and Chaos. Suddenly it all became clear again and I gasped with relief, as if the hand of darkness itself had released me. I regained my vision just in time to see Sun land on his feet where Towdy had been just a moment before, holding a fist outstretched like he'd just delivered a blow. He continued looking around for a moment before turning back to Ren and I. It looks like he's gone for now. You've either got a lot of guts or a death wish, young man, Sun lectured, trying to take on a legendary creature with a broken sword. And as for you, young lady, where are you supposed to be right now? Ren's head drooped and she kicked up dirt bashfully. At home. That's right! Now turn right around and get marching. It's Damon, right? Why don't you come with me for a bit? You look starved half to death. Sun chuckled.